Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth with your host, Dr. Joel Hunter.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. Today, we're going to be hearing from two clergy couples, husbands and wives, who serve their congregations' professional pastoral needs together. We have with us Megan and Dave Killingsworth, co-pastors at First United Methodist Church of Sanford, and Eugene and Laura Smith of City Church in Sanford. Both of these are really good friends of mine. These have been friends for 20 years.
20 years.
And these, just for the last couple of years, are doing so much in the community. So this is going to be fun. I was saying to them before we began this, that people are really curious as to how married people can actually work together every day, especially in high-stress situations. Being a pastor of a church is pretty high stress. You know, there's always somebody in crisis, always somebody in need and conflict, and so on and so forth. So let me get started. Let me start with you two, because you've been at this a while.
Okay.
And I know in the assemblies, it's not unusual, Assemblies of God denomination, it's not unusual to have at least the head pastor and his wife, the lead pastor and his wife, as co-pastors. But let me ask you just kind of a central question. Let me start with you, Laura. How do you balance the wife / mom / okay, I've got a role in the church. Yeah, administrator, school director, all of that stuff. Sure. I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, Laura, we'd like to
we started the church 20 years ago, and we moved here from Seattle. We had 6 adults and 4 kids. And so really, at the very beginning, it was almost like drawing straws. We had to figure out what part of the church we'd divide up. And I chose the straw of children's ministry. And he was obviously senior pastor. And so from the very beginning, we had a 3-year-old and 8-year-old. We integrated our family in everything that we did. And I think that because my son was 8 years old, and he used to originally help me with the puppets for 2 or 3 years. And we just, as a family, knew from the beginning that we were not of the school of thought where the family, the mom and the kids stay home, and dad goes away to work and pastors. We from the very start, we partnered together, and so it just became part of our tradition. I think
we'd also had planted a church together in the inner city of Seattle.
Oh, you did.
And so we had done that together. And even she was working a full-time job. Actually, we started that church. We were both bivocational. I was still working in school. Right. Planted this inner city church, and so we had been working together as a team in ministry and serving in that capacity. So we'd always kind of seen our from the very beginning. That's actually what drew us together in school. That we really felt that compatibility to serve God's people.
And we knew our boys would be part of that. Yeah. And we were very
so Sunday we do church, and then Monday we do visitation. Yeah. So all the new people, all of our first-time guests, we would take teams out. I mean, even just 2 teams, it would be my wife and I and maybe one other the new couples, and we'd wrap up cookies, and we'd go, if we had addresses, we'd go to people's doors. So our boys were with us. Yeah. So they've always been integrated in the life of the local church. I'm not saying it's more like the old concept of, mom and pop starting a grocery store and the kids, everybody's
family
living
business.
in the family,
was like
more
a
that
family
concept.
business.
Yeah. So
well, let me go to you guys, because you're just at the front end of this. You got a 2-year-old son, Moses. Did you meet at Duke? I can't remember.
No.
Okay.
No. We were married for 6 or 7 years before we went to semery.
Okay,
together.
very good.
So we had some practice.
Okay, yes. Both of you are bivocational also. But do you get the feeling, I mean, Becky and I have always been very best friends and partners in ministry as well, and never drew a line between our family activities and our church activities, and we're always included. Do you have a plan? You know, as Moses is growing up.
That's a cool name. Moses.
Yeah, isn't that great? Yeah. Moses. So, I mean, is there right now, is there okay, this is how we're going to do kids and the church and all that kind of stuff, or is it just kind of free floating?
You go ahead.
Yeah, well, so we've been really privileged to have a lot of really good mentors, clergy couple mentors, because how do you do this? There's not a ton of really great models out there, especially when you start to raise kids. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if your kid's going to resent your work, you know, you have to go off to work. Gosh, if that's the church, then what are you doing? Yeah. So trying to be able to create positive boundaries and giving him the option to sort of choose in to certain things. Now, he's 2, so he loves every single person in the world, and every person in our church loves him, and so it's really easy at this point. But yeah, as he grows and matures and sort of, you know, wants to come to things or not come to things, and how do we balance that too? Because the last thing you'd want, you know, is to say, I have to go to work, and then you say, oh yeah, the church. Yeah. You know, that's not what we want to create. So trying to balance, you know, both parenting and pastoring, and the joys and frustrations that go with each of those vocations.
Let me ask about that, Megan. Let me ask you specifically: are there things that, I mean, you're facing the church, and you don't want to come home and just face them again and say, David, this is what we're dealing with here. Are there things you just don't tell David because you just go, I'm over it. I just want to do home for a minute. You know, how does that work?
Well, we didn't figure that out very well for the first year. And so basically at any point, if one of us woke up in the middle of the night, we'd say, hey, we can't forget that thing. And you can only do that for so long until all the church committees are in every room of your house. Yeah. And we love our church people, but we did have to draw a line that you can only talk about church stuff in the living room. Okay. So if I'm in the kitchen or in my room or I'm like brushing my teeth, I don't want to hear about any of the church stuff. Wow. And so it has been really helpful for us because over time, all the work stuff can become part of your personal life, and all of our life at home can become work stuff, and then everywhere you kind of don't have any boundaries. And we started, I would love for us to move toward also having like time frames, but for right now, we have to be like, will you go with me to the living room? I need to ask you a question.
That's great. Yeah. That's great.
I think that's brilliant because we still don't have very good boundaries about things, and most of our staff meetings start at 6:30 in the morning in the bathroom. You know, and I understand that. I think that's great. I think that different personalities. I have become very adaptable, and because Eugene does not think thoughts without processing them out loud, so it's just. It's just
well, that's not like a man. Usually, you gotta think it through.
I'm a verbal processor.
Oh, that's great.
I just did this little test, the Enneagram test. Have you ever heard of that before? Anyway, it's like this personality.
You'll hear about it soon.
Everybody. So I did this Enneagram test. They're good. I mean, I think they're helpful. But my particular number on the Enneagram test. It leads to that. It leads to me wanting solutions quickly and those kinds of things. It makes you who you are. Yeah. You know, but I also want to resolve issues. So,
what number are you?
What's that?
What number are you on the Enneagram?
He's number 8.
Number 8.
8. Yeah. Awesome.
What does that mean? I mean, people are like, what's an 8? What's an 8?
He should be a church planter. So that
there you go.
Yeah. Our president right now is off the scale number 8. It just means you're strong. You know, you're more of a dominant personality. Yeah. You have a tendency to take charge in a situation. If there's a vacuum of leadership, it's not going to last long because you're going to fill that void. You have a clear sense that things need to move forward. And
that's interesting. Let me ask that about you two. Is there one of you that's more, I mean,
that's a good question.
More decision, the other more process? You know, how do you, what?
So we actually, we had a great, we heard our bishop preach one time, and he preached about bridges. And he said there's 2 parts of bridge building. One, somebody has to see where a bridge needs to go, and then somebody's got to build the bridge. Well, in our relationship, both personal and professional, Megan is the visionary, and I'm sort of the builder, if you will. And so that's been working out really, really well for us. And I think that that's one advantage that I would say I didn't anticipate is that certainly there's tensions and there's challenges with how do you not have a staff meeting at 6:30 in the morning or how in the middle of the night, and where are the lines and the boundaries. But as we learn about each other professionally, it actually enhances our personal life, because I know how Megan processes things better. And you'd think that 8 years of marriage would do that, and it has to a certain extent. But the more you learn about a person, the more you get to see them in their element, in their sort of, just that like sweet spot. Then you can see them do some really incredible things, and that's such a privilege to be a part of each and every day, right? That not everybody gets to see. Which I think is a real tremendous privilege that we get. That
and our roles are kind of reversed, and I'm definitely more the visionary, but she's also, she's got her own sense of vision, and as we've done this for quite a while now, that the giftings that God has put inside of her, those things are really coming out, and you see its impact. I mean, I always tell people, when they replace me, it's only one guy, and they replace her, it's 3 people. Yes. I mean, it's a fact, because she's in so many different areas in the church, and her engagement and involvement in it.
Whoever wants to chime in on this can, but we have dealt, speaking of my pastoral days, there's always somebody with...
You're still pastoring.
Well, I am pastoring. I'm pastoring the
I love you.
city, but not just a congregation now. But in the congregation, there's always somebody who's going through horrible trauma, or just breaks your heart kind of grief and surprises and all of that kind of stuff. Do you as couples process how to approach those folks differently? I mean, usually when God puts us together, He puts us together with somebody who thinks differently than we do, wired differently than we are, does that for a reason, because we need the balance. But let me ask specifically, I'll go to you first, David and Megan. When there's a tragedy in the congregation, who is the kind of pastoral person, and who is the let's see the family gets what they need kind of, how does that work with you guys?
Well, before we were pastors, I worked at Covenant House, which is a shelter for youth under 21. And so I actually had youth who lived on the streets call me pastor before a church congregation ever did. And so I'm forever indebted to those youth, because I really had this opportunity to live into a pastoral minister role where crisis was part of the everyday experience. And so in moments of extreme crisis and trauma, that is really where I came to understand myself to be in a pastoral role. And so it's helpful in our balancing, because I'm usually the one who does the kind of crisis management or the immediate needs, folks who are unhoused tonight and need to find a place, families living in their car, people going through, issues of addiction. And what's really helpful is Dave has training in pastoral care in health situations. He's done 14 funerals since we've been at the church in 2 years. Wow. And so we know each other's gifts well, which is part of the gift of being a clergy couple, is that if something crazy is about to happen, I'm probably the person who will step in. And if there's this steady presence of gentleness that's needed, especially with the grieving family, then Dave has this incredible gift of, from beginning to end, really walking through that.
Awesome. That's excellent. How do you guys do that?
Well, we have such a good staff now, an amazing staff. So for those type of tragedies, it's more of a team effort now. Eugene is extremely compassionate. Most funerals he cries at while he's preaching it. And people love him officiating because of the compassion that he communicates with the families. But so a lot of those practical things that we used to solve ourselves, now we have a way of wrapping families in love by a process of meals, etc. So it's
the process of life builds empathy in you.
Yeah,
I was thinking that. So the other day I was preaching and I talked about when people are in the hospital, they have a baby, or they're sick, or many times just because I feel like it, I'll ask my staff to send so-and-so flowers. And the reason I do that is because when my mother, she passed away at 53, the last few months of her life, she was extremely sick, all the stuff that happens at the end of life stuff when you've had cancer. And I sent her 2 dozen roses. I didn't think much about her. And I was in Seattle, and she was living in Tucson, and I sent her roses. And I remember when I walked into the room the last week of her life, and she had this huge smile. She could barely smile, but she had this huge smile, and those roses were right there at the end of her bed. And I remember the way that, I just remember that smile on her face, and that's all she could talk about were those beautiful roses. And I thought about, roses are for the living, flowers are for the living. And so from that day, that was 30, I don't know, she passed away in 93, whatever year it was, quite a few years ago. From that time, I've really made it a commitment to try to end people's tragedy, end people's difficult times, just to have a little tangible reflection of my mom's impact in my life. And flowers are a way to do it. It's not the only way, but it's a way for me to do it. And so a lot of times my staff, like one year, our elders were looking at the budget, and they're like, wow, you spent a lot of money on flowers. And I'm like, that's my ministry. And and I know you don't understand this, but this is out of this loss of my mother, and my father died right after that, both in their 50s, which has really shaped me, the way I've thought about life and history and time, because we don't know how long of a time we have on this planet, that when people are in their greatest time of need, it's when they need you the most. When life's going well and they maybe need you, don't really need you, but when people are, that's really the call, the shepherd. Absolutely. I would think. That's one of our great callings, is to be empathy. We are visionaries, and yes, I'm a driver, and I have all that component, which is kind of a conundrum in some ways inside of me. I can be extremely strong, and at the same moment, I can be very...
You mentioned the word empathy, and that's been my new favorite word, because you're right. The older you get, the more you cry. It's just I cry all the time.
I'm in so much trouble.
Oh, yeah.
I cry a lot now. So
you guys really are in trouble because you just feel people. But here's a challenge that I've seen in my son, who's a doctor, and I've seen it as in the pastoral ministry as well. There's only so much trauma you can take in. That's right. There's only so much, and then you got to go, I'm going to wreck if I don't, how do you feel with people, but stay desensitized enough to be functional? How do you guys do that as a couple? Do you take breaks? How do you do that?
Well, that's interesting. As Eugene, as you were talking about the flowers, that's kind of what I was thinking of, is that, that's a personal experience that's impacted and sort of influenced your ministry. And what a gift that is, that your mom's legacy kind of continues to live on in each person that's going through a hard time. And I think that as we, learn, as Megan was saying earlier, sort of the crisis side of things, probably more her, and more, long-term illnesses or hospital-type tragedies would be probably more me. And as we communicate more, and as we have to communicate more, we learn what each other needs. And so if there's a particularly trying episode or moment, or just an exhausting day, say, hey, I know you're supposed to put Moses to bed tonight, or whatever, or I know you're supposed to cook dinner, or what if we switch? And just sort of giving space for those places. We have different energies as far as introvert, extrovert, and so I think that that's also important, as your partner more than anybody else. And what a gift it is that if I'm supposed to be in the office the next day, Megan could do that, or I could do that, vice versa. If it was particularly heavy, to say, why don't you take the day? Why don't you just take the day off? I'll cover for you, because the emails can wait or whatever. But also for the essential duties, we can cover for one another to give space for the other person as a person, and help influence their job as a pastor as well.
We also both have great therapists.
That's very true.
And I genuinely believe that anybody who's taking care of anybody else needs to have professional support.
Good for you.
And so, man, I love therapy, and I think it's a good idea for everybody.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. This is different about this generation from my generation, because my generation, you don't tell anybody your problem. And if you're a leader, you can't show weakness and all of that kind of stuff. And so therapy when I was growing up was like, who would, but now it's a part of a healthy, I've got to process this with somebody who is not my spouse, who is not in my congregation. It's just wisdom now.
I thought about the overall brokenness of the world. A burden that the Holy Spirit puts in our heart drives the vision of our life.
Right.
But it's the individual person right in front of you that you can serve and minister to. And I think if you don't stay focused like that, like it's impossible. I mean, in our city alone, one little community, Sanford, Lake Mary, Seminole County, Castleberry, and our little, segment of Central Florida, there's so many needs. Yeah. And I can't fix all of them. Right. But the one the Lord puts right in front of me today, I can at least try to do something.
That's the way Jesus did it.
That's how Jesus did it. Yeah.
Just walk,
as he was going.
That's right.
As he was going.
That's right. So let me ask you two, because you've been at this a while. You got 2 grown sons, great kids. Yep.
They love you.
Well, I'm crazy about them.
Becky. Yeah.
Crazy about them. As you look back, now you're not old like I am, but you're getting to the latter part of the journey.
Yeah, the ruler on the amount of inches on the end of my ruler getting shorter for sure. Yeah.
But what do you treasure? I mean, you look back and you go, I'm so glad that either we went through that, or for those memories, or for those times. I mean, what do you treasure?
I think looking back, I really do treasure that our boys walked through ministry with us. We used to tell them they were part of a great adventure. We used to go on 5 years in a row. Every single Saturday we did flyer distribution, and they both went to everything, every pastoral visit just about. And then I also treasure that we trained them in a skill that they could give back to the church. So when Austin, I remember one Sunday playing the drums, singing alto into the mic, doing the announcements, and then running to the auditorium next door with all the kids
was way
following
back
me. And we didn't have a drummer at the time, so then I could drum a little bit.
Girl, you're a drummer.
I know, a drummer.
No,
well,
I love that.
I knew there.
When we first started, I told her she could play the organ. We were doing nursing home ministries, and I said, "Oh, my wife can play the organ." Because she can do anything. So I stuck her on an organ. She had never played it in her life before. She has a
Becky and I have a story like that too, but let's do this one. Don't get me started.
All that to say, we wanted our boys to have a gift that they could give back to the church, that they could serve the church. Yeah. So Austin took the drums, and Keenan learned the keys, and they were both our drummers, and Keenan is still on the keys and a musician. But having, you don't want your kids to get bitter about ministry, but it seems to me, especially for little boys, they need to, and they want to be engaged in what you're doing as a church. And you can figure out ways, whatever their skill is. I learned it from James Dobson. Their identity is so tied in when they're younger with the skills and what they're learning. I think that just doing ministry together and then talking through things with our boys, processing with them. Sometimes we would change the names to protect the innocent, but we would ask them, what do you think we should do in a situation like this? What would you recommend that this couple do?
Wow.
And I think that helped to develop their analytical skills. But I think just doing church together.
Of course.
But one thing I would say, it's the people that have come into our world and our life. I mean,
That's
true.
true.
And part of pastoring is you have friends today and they're gone tomorrow. I mean, just that part of it, but still the uniqueness and the beauty of the body of Christ, and also the different kind of people that your kids are going to meet. And our boys had an opportunity to meet people at the, in the bottom as far as culture and society and economics, but they've also had the opportunity to be with people at the top. And so they have the ability to just communicate and connect with people at every level of life in a way that most people have never really had to. Most people get into their tribe, they get into a little community, they get in a little soccer club, and that's really kind of where they stay. Our kids have been able to be at a broad spectrum and have relationships with all different kinds of people. And so I see it in their life today. I see it in the way they serve and the way they live and the impact. My oldest son's never been a soccer player, but he and his wife started a soccer team for disadvantaged kids in Hartford, Connecticut, where they live. And that came out about her experience, but also out of his heart to serve, and just the different kinds of people. It's really cool. I mean, they're working with these little 5, 6, 7-year-old kids that have disabilities, and
I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool to
love
see
that.
them now doing it. And we're not. I mean, obviously, 20 years old. I'm not telling them what to do. I mean, they're doing that on their own.
That's
So, yeah.
Well, David and Megan, let me ask you you're kind of just getting this started. What are you enjoying?
That's a good question.
What's because I focus so much on the problems on this program. I just love to hear about what you enjoy in what you're doing.
It feels so new that, I'm enjoying all of it.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I would say probably one of the greatest gifts that happens on our campus is something we didn't start and we're not in charge of, which is really cool. There's this incredible ministry called the Picnic Project, and it's a giant kingdom-looking meal where everybody comes together. It's a chef-prepared meal every Sunday. It meets in the fellowship hall, and it's run by folks who just really wanted the world to be a better place.
Wow.
And so every
That's really
Sunday, people who otherwise would not eat together find each other, share a meal. A chef has prepared it. It's healthy. It's beautiful. Wow. And that's such a gift to me. So
That's great. I love that.
yeah, I would say that's one of my things I'm enjoying. What
How
about you?
about you, David?
Yeah, I think both of you each of you have named some aspect of this, but just the role that we get invited into some really sacred spaces in people's lives. Megan mentioned the funerals, and I remember asking a mentor of mine very early on, how do you do that? Why do you do that? Why would you want to do that? And he, with tears in his eyes, said, "What a privilege it is to be invited. Sure. Who else gets invited there?" We baptized a young baby on Sunday, and that moment, in partnership with being invited into hospital spaces where no one else is, that's sacred. And we get invited there, and that's a privilege that I will not ever, I hope I never to take advantage of, and to never forget those impacts in my life, to be a part of, to intersect with somebody's story who, again, I might not otherwise know. But then I get invited into these intimate spaces, and those have long-lasting impacts on me.
And you will be surprised at the number of I'm going to cry.
That's good.
Just notes that you get 50 years from now from people with grandchildren say, "I remember when you baptized me. I'll never forget that day." And so it means a lot to them too. Well, we're out of time. It's probably a really good thing.
That's good.
I want to thank you and our panelists, David and Megan Killingsworth, First United Methodist Church in Sanford, Pastors Eugene and Laura Smith, City Church in Lake Mary. These are awesome people. Remember, these discussions are just that. They're discussions among us. But we'd love to see you continue these discussions at home with the principles that you heard. And always remember, the goal of Power Talks is to empower you through the voice of truth. See you next time.
You just watched Power Talks, a Good Life 45 original production that makes you part of our Hope team here on Good Life 45, where hope happens.